You might like to close your eyes, Chris, and I say that for obvious reasons. It's easier to relax, it's easier to visualize things with our eyes closed. If you ever want to open your eyes, not many people do, I might say, but if you do, that's absolutely fine by me. And anything else that helps you to be just as comfortable as you decide you'd like to be.
Hypnosis, mind control, brainwashing. Using words to control our minds is the subject of this week's programme. Our concept of hypnosis has come a long way in nearly 200 years, from the mysterious person whose magical powers put you into a deep sleep to the cheerful consulting rooms of today's hypnotherapists. But the central question remains, how do words control our minds? David Newton is an experienced hypnotherapist and a fellow of the Association for Professional Hypnosis and Psychotherapy. I went to see him at the Clifton Practice for Natural Health in Bristol. In his small, comfortable room, there were pictures on the walls of people playing cricket, green fields and seaside views. For David, these can be useful.
We need to interact with a person right from when we meet them in the waiting room. So if there are daffodils on the counter in reception, we can say something like, "It's nice to see spring arriving," talking about something nice. It might be topical, of course, and it might be to do with the weather.
So you're very conscious of the language you use right from the first moment you see somebody.
Yes, it will be problem-free language.
What is problem-free?
Problem-free is saying something nice. You come from the BBC. Do you know, I've had a great fondness always for the BBC. There we are. And I have, of course.
Well, do you have to be careful with sincerity as an issue with your language? Because you are often saying things to people, but they have to believe that you mean them, don't they?
Yeah, indeed. Sometimes it can be playful, of course. And people who are poorly, people who suffer from depression and anxiety, if you say something with a smile on your face, they're going to be pleased. They're going to be pleased about that. But they might mention the pictures. And then I can tell them the story about my wife painting them to see whether she could paint. And they might say, "Well, that's wonderful. Where's that?" And that's a part of Wales. And now we're talking inconsequentially, but in the left prefrontal cortex.
And you've got the language flow going that you
That's
want to go.
Right. Now, in modern therapy, we know that if we put them into the left prefrontal cortex, by talking in a nice, positive way, they're going to bring the very best out of themselves anyway.
So this phrase, the left prefrontal cortex, is going
Yes.
to crop up again and again in our conversation.
Yes,
I can
indeed.
see. Why is it so important to you? What does it mean, first of all, and why is it so important?
Well, there's a gentleman called Jonathan Cohen, a neuroscientist who researched this area, who showed that when we are talking inconsequentially or talking in a positive way, we will be in our left prefrontal cortex. The left prefrontal cortex, which is part of the intellectual brain, it's the conscious part of the intellectual brain, but it will be attached to that enormous intellectual area within the main cortex of the brain. And when we're in that area, we will come up with a proper assessment of any given situation. So it will tell you all the good things. The intellectual brain will tell you all the good things about whatever we're involved in. It won't sweep things under the carpet, but it will come up with a proper assessment. If we move into the right prefrontal cortex, then we will be attached to the primitive parts of the brain, which is headed up by the amygdala. And that part of the brain is invariably negative, and it's got to be negative because it's there for our self-preservation.
So although the language you're using you call inconsequential language, its effect in terms of where it puts your client is absolutely crucial. So if you say to me something about the daffodils on the table and I end up in the left prefrontal cortex, that's good. If you say to me, "What's your deadline for this programme?" I might go straight into the other bit.
Yes.
And be in the place where you don't want me at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how it's worked.
If I said to you, "What could go wrong?"
Yeah.
Then you're going to have to go into this part, into the primitive parts, to come up with the negative things that could accrue. And in our consulting room, we don't want that to happen. We want to bring out the very best to the person so they can come up with positive solutions.
And language is your tool for that.
And language is the tool for that.
And when would you resort to tools like metaphor or other tools?
I would use several metaphors in each session. I might use a metaphor when I meet the person in the waiting room, I might say somebody who suffers from severe OCD that, did you read about Ellen MacArthur? And it just shows that if we can focus our obsessional nature in things that are important, we get the very best out of ourselves.
Can I say that I'm a slight sceptic about the whole process of what I think of as hypnotism, but the way you describe it makes it sound quite attractive. So can we imagine, for example, that I've come to you and I've said, I have a slight problem sleeping, which is true. It's not a huge problem, but I do have a problem sleeping, and I'm worried about it, and can you help?
Okay. Now, something like 80% of the people who come to a clinic like ours, and we have 5 full-time hypnotherapists here, will present with some form of symptom which is associated with depression. That doesn't mean that we're clinically depressed, but it is part of the symptomology. So within the symptomology of depression will be insomnia or hypersomnia or a combination of both.
Okay, so say that we've met and you've used inconsequential language to put me in the right place in my brain.
Yes.
And we've had a discussion about things which make me feel happy, so I'm operating on that top bit, that's intellectual bit rather than the gloomy, frightened bit. Then what do you do with language?
So, we've explained to you that there is more anxiety in your life, more negativity than is good for you.
Right.
And I might elicit from you, there we are, you wake up tomorrow morning and you're less anxious. And if you're less anxious, what would you be less anxious about? And then you would go into a picture formation and you would tell me that you wouldn't be so worried about this, that, and the other. And we have a picture now of you being able to cope with that particular situation in a better way. So when I put you on the couch, I might say things to you that whenever you allow your conscious mind to focus on problems, then you drag those problems into the future with you. So from this landmark moment in your life, focus your thought energy on how you want things to be. Let your mind know what you want, because then what you want, ba-bum. Now, you can see that I'm saying this with a certain amount of emotion.
Yes.
Because you even felt that then,
Yes.
that I am committed to helping you.
So your tone of voice is very important.
Very important. Yes.
And your tone has to be committed.
I've got to be committed, sincere.
So in a way, it's the opposite of this cartoon vision that we have of the hypnotist, which is this slightly dreamy way of speaking. You're saying that you speak in a very positive way that makes people think that you're absolutely engaged, and you're getting your hands dirty in their brain. That you're going to make.
And both of us now know what the brain is doing and working hard on. It's coming up with better solutions in that particular area to get the best out of it and prevent anxiety creeping in.
So, okay, crunch time. Can I get on the couch then, please?
Absolutely. Hang on. Come on, let's have you on there. Lie back. Now, this is the time that I would be talking to Chris again in inconsequential language. And he might come up with anecdotes about that.
Why did you put a blanket on me, just out of interest?
It feels safer.
Oh.
And also, people who come into our consulting rooms have to follow a discipline.
Right.
So they do what we suggest they do, certainly to begin with. Now, while I'm switching out the light, I will keep up the conversation. How long were you in Cornwall?
I lived in Cornwall for 3 years in Truro. So, but not. I'm from Bristol, so not Cornish like you are.
You might like to close your eyes, Chris, and I say that for obvious reasons. It's easier to relax, it's easier to visualise things with our eyes closed. But like anything and everything we do here, it's certainly not obligatory. If you ever want to open your eyes, not many people do, I might say, but if you do, that's absolutely fine by me. And anything else that helps you to be just as comfortable as you decide you'd like to be. And it wasn't until that first man looked out of the window and said, "Look, everything is changing." And they realised the sky was blue again. The birds were singing. The flowers, the trees were back in bloom. And you can recognize now that capability that is yours. And it's always been yours. So that when you leave here today, you'll find it easier and easier to feel good about all the things in your life that you ought to feel good about. You'll find it easier and easier to feel good about all the things that you do. So when you're ready and you're in control, you can once more open your eyes.
Oh. Much more, I mean, given that it was being recorded, which isn't, I suppose the ideal situation for these things, I was much more relaxing than I thought it was going to be. It was a very powerful performance, if performance is what you call it.
You were aware that I meant it?
Yeah.
David Newton. Hypnosis has worked its way into mainstream medicine. Some dentists and GPs offer it as complementary therapy, and NICE, the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, approves it for the treatment of irritable bowel disease. In America, Dan Cohen, the professor of pediatrics at the University of Minnesota, uses it extensively to treat children. But he doesn't call himself a hypnotist.
No, hypnotist is for those people who go on the stage and do entertainment. I'm a doctor. And I utilize a variety of methodologies to help young people to help themselves.
And those would include language?
Absolutely.
And how do you use language?
The way we talk is the way we think, and the way we think is the way we feel, and the way we feel is the way we behave. So if someone comes to me with a question about their behavior, not maladaptive behavior necessarily, but say they hurt, they have a pain, recurrent headaches, for example, or they have a habit problem of some kind, or they have some anxiety about something. It's quite easy, and parents often fall into the trap, as do teachers, of saying to somebody, well, just stop doing that. Don't worry. It never helped me for somebody to tell me not to worry. Show me how not to worry is quite different. So, on the other hand, if you change the way you feel, that helps to change the behavior. Well, changing your feeling isn't so easy either, but if you start by changing the way you think, and you access that by changing the way you talk, then you have better than a fighting chance to solve the problem.
But it's not that easy to teach people to talk differently. You might, in that moment, in your room, you might be successful, but you're talking about almost altering the way their brains work, aren't you, to get them to do it on a more permanent basis?
Quite right, and it's absolutely dependent on, each individual person is different, and it's absolutely dependent upon their expectations and their motivation. Most children and adolescents get this right away. And I can give you an example. The people will say, for example, well, yeah, I'd like to try that, and they're very much in a positive mindset when they say that. But even when they say that, I point out to them that I'm not interested really in having them try. I'd much rather that they do it. And they get that. And if they don't get that, I have some ways of connecting to popular culture items that will help them to understand that. For example, the character from Star Wars, Yoda, as you know, the so-called Jedi Master, said in one of the films, do or do not. There is no try. And we even have that in our common language. We have idiomatic expressions, try and try again, and if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. So try has this implication in modern language of failure. But just doing it, of course, you know the popular shoe manufacturer whose slogan that is and says, just do it. So this is pretty concordant with people's modern thinking.
But we sometimes think of advertisers selling those shoes as trying to brainwash us in some way. Just do it. You know, failure's not an option is another phrase. Well,
Right.
of course, failure is an option. People fail all the time. People try all the time. So, I mean, when does this become a kind of deception that you're practicing?
Well, it's everything but deception. This is all about empowerment of people to find ways to manage the thing for which they've come for help. And often it's a matter of asking. I can never help anybody who doesn't want to be helped, that's for sure.
Which conditions are you most commonly asked to treat? Are they mainly psychological ones or ones with a strong psychological element?
Well, it's actually both, and I think probably the most common conditions that we see are recurrent pain problems such as migraine headaches and tension headaches, which certainly have a biologic basis and are by many people often treated with pharmacologic agents. But it's been probably 25 or 30 years since I've prescribed any medicine for a child with migraine, and the kids I see and the kids seen by others who use these strategies and teach children how to manage them, they get better, and without medication.
So it does work.
Absolutely.
And it's statistically proven, is it? I mean, you could point, if I were in your consulting room, you could point to cases and say that's worked, that's worked, that's worked.
Yes, and we have the data for that. I mean, as long ago as 25 years ago, we surveyed the experience of 4 clinicians, myself and 3 others, and published a paper which remains the largest series ever published about children using hypnotic strategies, and that was over 500 children, with a success rate about 84%.
What does the word trance mean to you?
It's a euphemism used for the hypnotic state, and there are a variety of forms of so-called hypnotic trance, and people move in and out of spontaneous states of hypnosis all day long without any clinician's help. It's a state of mind of focused alertness and focused concentration that we do when we listen to a concert, when we read a book.
When a child comes to you then with a really serious migraine problem, do you at some stage expect to put them or to help them achieve a state of that kind?
Absolutely.
How do you get them into this state in the first place? Do you have different forms of words you know will work?
Well, there's all sorts of things, but the easiest is to say, well, why don't you just imagine that you're doing something you really enjoy? And they do it with their eyes open or their eyes closed. It doesn't matter.
And then what do you do with them when you've got them there?
They're quite good at getting there quite easily, and what I do is invite them to imagine something they enjoy doing. I know what kinds of options to offer them because I've spent some time getting to know them and know what they do for fun. And then I teach them a variety of ways that they might picture themselves in their mind experiencing the headache going away. And there's really no limit to that other than their imagination.
And if someone came to you and said, okay, I accept what you're doing and I can see that it works, but then also the idea of the placebo in medicine works, and what you're doing is very similar, what would you say to that?
Well, first of all, placebo is one of those great oxymorons. It's real. So is a placebo or not? That's my focus on words. So first of all, placebo is a real response. And second, in a given instance, I can't be 100% sure that the person's improvement is because they wanted it to, and therefore it's placebo, or if it's because of the techniques that they've learned and they've been working on. And truthfully, in that moment, clinically, I don't care.
Dr. Dan Cohen. The idea of language exerting such powerful control over our minds can have darker connotations when we start thinking about cults and the concept of brainwashing.
Don't you want devoted followers who leave their families for you, give their money to you, give their bodies to you, give up their lives for you, consider you God, and will kill for you?
I love you.
Don't you want to become a cult leader? Since the death of God, there's been a vacancy open. You could fill that void. Here's how. Structure your cult like an onion with the most benign and helpful features on the outside and the most controlling, kooky, and evil parts at the secret inner core. Use deception. Don't tell them who you really are. Lie. Leave out important information or distort information.
Are you trying to recruit me? No. I'm just trying to share something meaningful with you.
That's from a film called Mind Control Made Easy we came across on YouTube. But if a group is labelled a cult, are we too quick to assume that the language it uses is dangerous? Annabel Mooney, that's N-E-Y, from Roehampton University, tackles this question in her book, The Rhetoric of Religious Cults. Some of her conclusions are controversial, and they provoked a response from Matthew Forrester, who grew up in a large evangelical community, which he now calls a benign cult. This is how Matthew describes his early life.
I went to a church in Memphis, Tennessee, and in Jonesboro, Arkansas, from birth. I don't remember not being a part of it.
So your parents were members of that church?
Yes, and my grandfather.
And why is that church a cult rather than a church?
I would say, well, they share all the characteristics of a cult. They have the one charismatic leader. He was God's one and only end-time apostle, and he had direct access to God, and God didn't work on earth through anyone except him. Extreme adherence to the belief systems and the ideologies that they embrace. Restriction of counter discourses, the discourses of the church.
Restriction of counter discourses, you mean they didn't like people disagreeing with them?
Oh, absolutely not.
And in terms of your life, what were you expected to do? I mean, how did you lead your life?
I never knew anything except that I was different, that I was called to be different. So I grew up very smug, that I was one of God's chosen, and the other people around me weren't. We were strongly discouraged from associating with people outside the religion. We also had our belief system required that we abide by dietary laws of the Old Testament, for instance, and we didn't eat pork or fish without scales. And
was the language powerful? Did you, as a child, did you find the language powerful?
Oh yes, it was very powerful and very intriguing, and we were taught from birth that this was God speaking to us when the minister spoke.
And so did you feel threatened by the language?
No, I didn't feel threatened. I because I was one of the chosen. Although now when I read it and look at the literature, I see how fear-inducing it is.
Well, let's bring in Annabel Mooney. Annabel, when you began your book on the rhetoric of religious cults, did you expect to find cults using language in a very specific and perhaps suspicious way?
Yes, I fully expected to find that there was some distinctive use of language at that kind of syntactic and rhetorical level that was very different from the way other people might use persuasive language. There are certainly differences in terms of the effect and in terms of what one is persuaded to do or to think. But the kinds of devices that they're using are precisely the same devices that anyone who's trying to persuade you to do anything will use.
Such as what? Humour or common experience? Or
Common experience is a good one, yes, and the use of modals. So instead of saying, for example, you will believe such and such after I have spoken to you, they'll use a more mitigated form. So they'll say something like, you may believe X, Y, and Z. And so it's allowing the audience a space to come towards the speaker, as it were, rather than setting up some kind of polarization before the person has even engaged with the idea. One of the things that was a particular commonality is the appeal to science. And of course we see this in everything from shampoo advertisements to someone trying to sell you a car. The talismanic value of appealing to science, which we all think of as being very objective and very rational, is a common one and is quite a strong persuasive technique.
But hair washing is very different to brainwashing, isn't it? I mean, if you're using language to persuade someone to buy shampoo, that's
Sure.
very different to using language to persuade someone to join an organisation, which, in history, some of these organisations have done terrible things, and language is a recruiting tool and also a tool to persuade people to do bad things, isn't it?
I guess the position that I was reacting against is that I started to hear some scholars, not linguists or people actually working with language, I hasten to add, who would identify certain techniques that were used and that are used in persuasion and then label those techniques as bad. And I don't think you can do that. I think what you need to do is to look at effects. And I'm not saying that harm doesn't happen, but I don't think it's something that you can inhibit by trying to stop the way or monitor the way that people speak to each other. I think there's a little bit more to it than just the structure of the linguistic devices that are used.
And in response to that, people have referred to you as a cult apologist, haven't they? I mean, I think, Matthew, you've in the past referred to Annabel as someone who apologises for cults. What was it about her book that you thought made her a cult apologist?
Well, it just seemed to me that it was meant to claim that cults were relatively benign, apparently, since their recruitment literature didn't use any different persuasive techniques than those of other organizations. I think the recruitment literature is intentionally more benign. And I think that otherwise, if they knew that you were a bunch of kooks from the start, they'd never join. Of course, language controls the mind. If you don't believe that, try not thinking in words. What is much more dangerous about cults is that they deliberately physically restrict the exposure to any counter discourses and bombard you constantly with their own ideological trappings.
Annabelle, doesn't Matthew's experience make you feel uncomfortable in the way that language was being used on him?
Sure, it makes me feel really uncomfortable. I mean, my concern is that we need to put our attention in the right place, and I think trying to focus any kind of preventative attention, like trying to prevent harm, for example, by monitoring just the language, is not the way to do that. That what you need to do is to look at these kinds of social conditions and these environmental controls that Matthew's talking about. And if you start saying this use of language is good and this use of language is bad, I'm not sure it solves the problem, and I think actually it starts doing exactly the kinds of things that we say we don't like about cults.
And finally, Matthew, what was the language that was used towards you when you said that you were leaving? I mean, did they have a special way of speaking to people who were going to join the unchosen, as it were?
Well, I didn't really have a discussion with them about that. I was expelled. But at any time anyone had any doubt, we were called in, and I was called in, and I was completely humiliated. I was told that I was nothing but a worm to God, and that I was a dirty menstrual cloth. And of course, these are taken straight out of the Bible, so they even had biblical support of their humiliation of me. And they wouldn't stop until they just had beaten me down, and I was in tears.
But you say beat you down, but there was no physical oppression in any of this, was there?
No.
It's all done by language.
It's all mental. Yeah, all mental, and it's all done by language.
And it reduced you to tears when it happened?
Yeah, of course.
And did you go through any kind of experience afterwards? I was going to use the word deprogramming, but that sounds a bit severe. But did you go through any experience where you had to get things out of you?
Do you know, what I did was had about 5 years where I just engaged in a lot of very destructive behavior personally. I got into alcohol and drugs and promiscuity and all the things. I mean, if I was going to lose my eternal salvation, I might as well live it up on the way out, was what I thought. But then I got interested in, I started going to the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and I liked to write, so I got involved. They had a separate department of rhetoric and writing. And what I found was that the study of rhetoric was therapeutic for me. I realized that it was this very specific use of language that creates not only cultic members' worldviews, but everyone's worldviews. And I certainly do want to raise attention to cultic recruitment and to help people analyze the rhetoric, but I'd like to help people do that with any organization.
Which is what we've been talking about in this programme, the use of words to control our minds, whether it's by a hypnotherapist, a cult leader, or even an advertising guru. We heard there from Matthew Forrester and Annabelle Mooney. And that's it from Word of Mouth for this week. Goodbye.